In 1994, television reports shocked the public with news of Professor David's arrest for the rape and murder of a female colleague. The case remained unresolved for years, but 6 years later, the court finally sentenced him to death. His execution was scheduled for Friday, leaving only 4 days before his life would come to an end. While watching the report, a newspaper editor suddenly received a call from a man claiming to be David's personal lawyer. The lawyer offered the newspaper an exclusive opportunity to interview David. But there was one very specific condition. He wanted Bitsy Bloom, a female journalist, to conduct the interviews. The meetings had to take place on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday afternoons just before David's execution, and the newspaper was expected to pay $500,000 for the exclusive story. Bitsy was puzzled by the lawyer's unusual request and could not understand why David had chosen her. The reporters were uncomfortable with the enormous price, but the possibility of an exclusive story of national importance was too valuable to ignore. Bitsy and her intern assistant Zach quickly left New York, heading toward the prison where David was being held. As they drove, they went over the details of the murder that had placed him on death row. His fingerprints had reportedly been found at the crime scene, and DNA evidence had been discovered inside the victim, creating a strong connection between David and the crime.
House. His prints were all over the kitchen, including one on the bag.
Half a thumbprint.
Okay, half a thumbprint, that's enough.
Well, he could have touched it before it was a murder weapon.
Do you fondle your friends' garbage bags?
Yeah, I get very touchy around household plastics. I'm particularly fond of Tupperware.
Tupperware?
Look, I'm just saying, the bag could have been sitting up on the counter or something.
Zach?
Yeah.
He did it. Now he's gonna die. And you know something? Maybe that's exactly what he deserved.
Yet, the more they discussed David, the stranger the case seemed. He was not an ordinary man. David was highly educated and considered exceptionally intelligent. He had received a Rhodes Scholarship to Harvard and later became a philosophy professor at the University of Austin. His academic achievements made the accusation against him difficult to understand. As they continued driving, Bitsy and Zach struggled to understand how a respected and highly educated man could throw away everything he had built by committing such a brutal crime. Their journey was interrupted when the car suddenly developed a problem. They pulled over and began checking the vehicle to find out what had gone wrong. While Zach stepped away to use the restroom, a strange cowboy appeared and stopped nearby. His unexpected presence immediately made Bitsy uncomfortable, and she quickly called Zach back to the car. The man did not approach them or cause any trouble. After noticing them, he simply drove away, leaving Betsy wondering about the strange encounter. The following morning, Bitsy and Zach finally reached the Texas prison where David was being held. They were taken through several strict security checks before the warden personally led them into the heavily guarded death row section. As Bitsy walked through the facility, she noticed other prisoners watching her from behind their cells, their looks making her increasingly uncomfortable.
Now, we have three concerns here: safety, safety, and safety. Now, the visitation area is entirely secure. We just ask that you don't touch the glass. Windex gets expensive. You're not carrying a weapon, are you, Bitsy? Bitsy?
Sorry, no.
She expected David to give her the same impression, but when she finally saw him, she was surprised. His appearance did not match the image she had formed of a convicted rapist and murderer. Once they were seated, Bitsy wasted little time before asking why he had specifically chosen her for the interviews. David explained that he knew about her reputation for maintaining professional ethics and protecting confidential sources. In his view, that reputation made her the only journalist he could trust with what he was about to reveal. David explained that his execution was only a few days away, and he wanted someone to document what had really happened before it was too late. He wanted the events of the past 6 years recorded from his perspective. With that, he began telling Bitsy the story that had eventually brought him to death row. Feels strange how calm he for someone waiting to be executed. 6 years earlier, David had been working as a philosophy professor at the University of Austin. His lectures regularly attracted large groups of students because of the way he presented difficult ideas and encouraged them to question their understanding of human behavior. After the lecture ended, a female student named Berlin approached David and made it clear that she was willing to do anything if it would help her receive a better grade. David immediately recognized the sexual nature of her offer and refused to cross the professional boundary between professor and student before walking away.
I would do anything to pass.
Anything, huh?
Any.
Okay, Berlin.
I will give you a good grade. I will give you a very, very good grade if you would just study.
Later that evening, after tucking his son to sleep, David attended a university party with several colleagues. During the gathering, he learned that Berlin had been expelled from the university. David's personal life was also complicated at the time as his wife often traveled. At the party, his usual serious and controlled behavior disappeared. He drank heavily, joked crudely with the others, and became increasingly intoxicated. When David later left the group to use the restroom, Berlin appeared again. She told him that she admired him and tried to explain that her earlier offer had only been an attempt to get his attention. David was drunk and no longer behaving like the controlled professor his students knew. In his intoxicated state, he crossed a line by sleeping with her.
Thanks for coming.
The following day, David was exhausted and shaken when he met his friend Constance Haraway. The two were closely involved in the movement against the death penalty and regularly met to discuss their campaign and plan ways to support their cause. Later that same day, David was scheduled to appear on live television for a debate with the governor of Texas about abolishing the death penalty. Constance had spent considerable time preparing research and evidence that David could use during the discussion. At the beginning of the debate, David appeared confident and well prepared. He presented his arguments clearly and managed to put the governor under pressure with several strong points.
Well, Governor, murderers are not deterred by the thought of execution. They're just not, and you know it. Every single study that's been done on this subject, and there's been over 200 of them, and you've read them, Governor, has reached the same conclusion. They all say the same thing.
Well, maybe you should read your Bible. Deuteronomy. 1921, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
What did Gandhi say about that? The old law of an eye for an eye leaves us all blind.
Well, I'm sorry, and with respect, that's fuzzy liberal thinking, David.
You really believe that, Governor?
Of course.
Well, that's interesting, because you said that yourself in a speech in your first campaign.
He got you there, Governor. How about it?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Well,
However, as the discussion continued, David became too confident and walked into a challenge he could not answer. Constance watched from the side and quickly realized that the debate was slipping away from him. The governor turned David's argument against him by demanding that he provide the name of even one person who had been wrongly sentenced to death. He then claimed that if David could produce such a case, he would personally submit a proposal to end the death penalty. David could not provide the evidence the governor demanded, leaving him unable to defend his position at the most important moment of the debate. Afterward, David tried to explain what had happened to Constance and defend his actions, but their conversation was suddenly interrupted. Two police officers appeared and stopped David before he could go any further.
You licked one single mail-out envelope?
Mr. Gale,
Oh, hey, guys, the governor went that way.
Ramirez, Austin Police, this is Officer Hasserman.
What, is debating the governor a crime now?
No, sir. Rape is.
They arrested him on suspicion of rape, leaving both David and Constance stunned by what was happening. The accusation was connected to the incident from the previous night. Berlin had apparently reported the assault, turning her earlier encounter with David into an act of revenge that would soon change the course of his entire life. Berlin had intentionally left marks and other evidence on her body before accusing David of rape. However, before the case could develop further, she suddenly withdrew the accusation and disappeared. David's immediate danger seemed to have passed, but the incident remained part of his complicated past. Just as Bitsy was trying to process everything he had told her, a prison guard entered and announced that visiting hours had ended. With no more time available, Bitsy brought the first interview to a close and prepared to leave. Before she walked away, David revealed one more detail about the student. He explained that she had later sent him a postcard saying that she was sorry. Something about that apology doesn't add up. The revelation left Bitsy unsettled. She began wondering why David had chosen to tell her this particular story. If the earlier accusation had been false, then perhaps the murder charge against him could also have been based on a lie. The possibility gave the case an entirely different meaning. The following morning, heavy rain covered the Texas highway as Bitsy returned for another interview. The gloomy weather added to the uneasy feeling surrounding the case. Since she still had several hours before she was due to meet David again, Bitsy decided to use the time to investigate the murder herself. She drove to the former home of Constance, David's friend, and the woman whose death had ultimately placed him on death row. That's some real dedication. By then, Constance's house had become something of a small tourist attraction because of the murder that had taken place there. The woman managing the property explained that visitors had to pay $20 to enter. Bitsy entered the house and began examining the place where Constance had died. trying to understand what had happened beyond the details she had read in the case files.
He used those housewife gloves so he wouldn't leave prints. They found sticky stuff from the tape on them. Totally sick part is where they found the key to the handcuffs.
Yeah. We know.
Constance had been found naked on the kitchen floor, and the evidence suggested that her death had been carefully carried out in a particularly cruel manner. The killer had reportedly restrained her by placing handcuffs on her wrists behind her back. He then forced her to swallow the key before placing a plastic bag over her head. Unable to free herself or breathe properly, Constance eventually died from suffocation. While examining the kitchen, Bitsy noticed something that immediately caught her attention. A tripod stood nearby, suggesting that a camera might have been positioned there when the murder occurred. If the killing had actually been recorded, the footage could have provided crucial evidence. Yet, according to the police investigation, no recording had ever been recovered from the area. After leaving the house, Bitsy and Zach stopped at a nearby restaurant to eat. The details of Constance's death continued to trouble them, especially the strange combination of evidence they had just seen. They were still discussing the case when the same mysterious cowboy appeared again. He noticed them, stopped for a moment, and carefully looked in their direction before driving away. His repeated appearances were becoming difficult to dismiss as a coincidence, leaving Bitsy increasingly suspicious about his connection to the investigation. Bitsy then returned to the prison for her second scheduled meeting with David. David described a brutal interrogation method and explained it to Bitsy. David also told Bitsy that he had actually mentioned it in an article he had written. Because of that, he argued that the method used against Constance made little sense as evidence of his guilt. To David, those contradictions suggested that the evidence had been arranged to make him appear responsible rather than reveal what had truly happened. The evidence increasingly made Bitsy suspect that someone had deliberately tried to make David look guilty. The more he explained, the less certain the case became. What had initially looked like a straightforward murder conviction was turning into a confusing series of unanswered questions.
Any idea who they are?
No, but I've got someone working on that. That somebody brought it there, set it up, wiped it clean, and left it.
Someone's framing you?
Oh, it's more than that.
David then continued describing what had happened to him 6 years earlier, after the rape accusation destroyed his reputation. Although Berlin eventually withdrew the charges, the damage had already been done. His personal life also collapsed. David's wife used the situation as a reason to file for divorce and move to Spain with their child. Their home in the United States was sold so that the property and other assets could be divided between them. Before leaving, David's son left behind his favorite toy for his father. The small gesture affected David deeply because it was one of the few things he had left that connected him to his child.
Has any couple ever really survived a trial separation? I mean,
Don't.
isn't separating...
I sent you an email.
An email.
Just read it.
Around the same time, Constance informed David that the university had dismissed him. Losing his job made the situation even worse. He had once been a respected professor whose lectures attracted large numbers of students, but now he was treated as a disgraced criminal. He tried to find another teaching position and contacted different institutions, hoping someone would give him an opportunity to start over. No university was willing to hire him because of the accusations surrounding his name.
It'd be nice to have a faculty member whose crutch wasn't Prozac. For a freshman with an ear for gossip, I'd be hiring a rapist.
Those charges were dropped.
You're not politically correct, Dr. Gale. Welcome to the club.
I honestly felt bad for David. David became determined to regain custody of his child, believing that having his son back would give him a reason to rebuild his life. He repeatedly tried to contact his wife, but she refused to answer his calls. His lawyer warned him that winning custody would be extremely difficult because the accusations had made him appear unfit to care for his child. With his career gone, his family separated, and his reputation destroyed, David struggled to find a way forward. He eventually joined an alcohol support group to deal with the problems that had developed after everything fell apart. He also accepted a low-level job simply to earn enough money to survive. When he eventually met Constance again, she was genuinely pleased to see that he was trying to change his life. David believed that the organization they had once supported, the group fighting against the death penalty, would also accept him back. Instead, he discovered that they wanted nothing to do with him, leaving him once again isolated despite his efforts to rebuild his life.
Mr. Sinclair, the new national director.
John, David's gonna go.
Gale's not around, is he?
No.
Last thing we need is this rape thing coming back to
John.
bite us on the butt. And these guys don't stay on the wagon for very long.
John.
That night, David tried once more to speak with his son by telephone. Before he could have a proper conversation with him, his wife took the phone away and ended the call. Being cut off from his child was more painful than anything else he had experienced. The following day, desperate for someone he could turn to, David went to Constance's home. Instead of finding comfort, he watched her suddenly collapse. She was taken to a hospital where David learned that she was suffering from leukemia.
You didn't know? Mr. Gale, a leukemia patient's condition is highly susceptible to external stress.
After hearing David's account, Bitsy began to question everything she had previously believed about the murder. His close friendship with Constance made it difficult for her to see a clear reason why he would want to kill her. Later, Bitsy returned to her hotel carrying the money intended for David's lawyer with Zach. When they reached her room, they immediately noticed something was wrong. The door had been left unlocked, even though she was certain she had secured it earlier. They hesitated before entering, aware that someone could still be inside. They slowly stepped into the room and looked around. Then they noticed something hanging from the ceiling, a videotape that had been deliberately left there for her. The tape immediately caught her attention, and Bitsy realized that someone wanted her to see it. She put it into the player, nervous about what she might discover. Her fears were confirmed when the recording began showing Constance's murder. The footage showed Constance lying on the floor with her hands restrained behind her back and a plastic bag sealed over her head. She struggled desperately for air, but there was no way for her to free herself. Bitsy watched as Constance gradually weakened until she finally stopped moving. The images left Bitsy shaken as she realized that someone had secretly preserved the entire murder and then deliberately delivered the recording to her. That image is horrifying. The next morning, Bitsy had a plan for the final day. She intended to take the $500,000 payment to David's lawyer first and then return to the prison for her last interview with David. As she and Zach prepared to leave, the mysterious cowboy appeared once again. By then, his repeated presence was becoming impossible to ignore. He seemed to be following them, although his attempt to remain unnoticed was not very convincing. Zach tried to get a clear look at his license plate, but before they could record it, the cowboy turned onto another street and disappeared. When they reached the lawyer's office, Bitsy handed over the $500,000 payment and immediately told him about the videotape she had discovered in her hotel room. She hoped the recording could provide a way to challenge David's conviction, but the lawyer quickly dismissed that possibility. Bitsy was frustrated because she had believed the recording might finally give them something capable of reopening David's case.
This ain't my first rodeo, Miss Bloom. Now, to add to our troubles, your own credibility may come into question. Well, let's not throw a pity party and sit around reading Kafka. Could be we find a sympathetic judge.
She left the office and headed back toward the prison for the final interview. Before reaching there, however, Bitsy noticed someone familiar on the first floor. The mysterious cowboy was there again. She immediately suspected that his repeated appearances might have something to do with the lawyer. Bitsy rushed outside and alerted Zach, who decided to follow the man while Bitsy took a taxi back to the prison. Zach chased after the cowboy through the streets, but the man managed to get away once again. Although he could not catch him, he finally succeeded in recording the vehicle's license plate number. Back at the prison, Bitsy brought up the mysterious cowboy during the final interview, and David immediately recognized who she was talking about. He explained that the man was named Dusty Wright and was connected to the same organization that had fought against the death penalty. However, unlike the other members, he had become extreme in his beliefs and had developed an unhealthy obsession with Constance. He had strong feelings for her, but those feelings were never returned. The information immediately made Bitsy wonder whether the man could have been responsible for Constance's death. David did not give her a direct answer, instead continuing with the events that had taken place before the murder. Constance, even as her health declined, she continued working toward the goal she had devoted herself to, helping people facing the death penalty. She had experienced repeated failures and had never managed to save a single person on death row, but she refused to completely abandon the cause. As her illness progressed, though, it became harder for her to continue. One night, David and Constance became emotionally close, sharing a private moment that felt almost like that of a couple. Both were overwhelmed by everything they had lost and the struggles they had faced, and they held on to each other while expressing their pain. One thing led to another, and they ended up sleeping together. The following morning, Dusty arrived at Constance's home and knocked on her door. David had gone back to his former house around the same time. He was carrying the toy his son had left behind and became lost in memories of the family he had lost. The new owners soon discovered David outside the property and forced him to leave. With nowhere else to go, he spent that night sleeping inside his car. His situation became even worse when the police eventually found and arrested him for Constance's murder. By the time Bitsy had heard the entire account from David, she was convinced that Dusty was the most likely killer. His obsession with Constance, combined with his hostility toward David, gave him a possible motive. Bitsy also believed that the videotape had been deliberately sent to her, and that finding the complete recording could provide the evidence needed to prove David's innocence. Bitsy was frustrated that David had never contacted anyone for help during the years he spent in prison. She believed he could have tried harder to expose the truth, especially if he had known that Dusty was involved. But David had already accepted that he might die, and he did not want his son to grow up believing that his father was a cruel murderer.
Fighting. Killing. But what do we really know about death? It's what I need you for. It's why I chose you. Now I've told you everything. You're here to save my son's memory of his father. That's all I want.
As David was taken away by the prison guards, Bitsy struggled to control her emotions. She now believed that an innocent man might be executed, but there was almost no time left to prove it. The approaching execution filled her with urgency. That night, she stayed awake studying the case files and repeatedly watching the videotape, searching every frame for something that could identify the killer or reveal where the missing evidence was hidden. Despite hours of examination, she found nothing useful. The next morning, exhausted from barely sleeping, Bitsy continued thinking about the murder. While handling a towel, she suddenly noticed a detail that made her stop. She woke Zach and explained what she had realized. Without wasting any more time, the two of them rushed back to Constance's house, determined to recreate the crime step by step and find the detail everyone else had overlooked. I knew there was more to this. Bitsy carefully reviewed the murder recording again and noticed a small detail that had escaped her before. At the beginning of the footage, Constance's foot moved slightly, showing that she was still conscious. However, she did not begin struggling until roughly 15 seconds later. That timing made Bitsy question the entire murder theory. If someone had suddenly attacked Constance and placed a plastic bag over her head, her natural reaction would have been to fight immediately. The delay suggested that she had known what was happening and had not initially tried to escape. To test the idea, Bitsy attempted to recreate the conditions herself. She placed a plastic bag over her head and sealed it, carefully observing what happened as the air became harder to breathe. After about 15 seconds, the lack of oxygen became overwhelming, confirming that the bag could quickly create a serious suffocation risk. The experiment gave Bitsy the missing piece she had been searching for and helped her understand that the scene may not have been a murder at all.
Maybe she was faking, hoping he'd go away.
Turn them inside out. And put the duct tape on the floor. I want you to lie down, facing the counter. We can imagine that part.
She then reconsidered the other evidence found inside Constance's home. The rubber gloves had clearly been used, but they had been placed neatly aside rather than thrown away. The rest of the scene also began to make sense. The handcuffs and the swallowed key would have prevented Constance from freeing herself, while the plastic bag would have ensured that she eventually suffocated. Bitsy realized that the arrangement had been designed to prevent instinctive resistance from changing the outcome. The evidence that had once appeared to describe a brutal murder now pointed toward something very different. Bitsy concluded that Constance had deliberately arranged her own death. Knowing that she was suffering from leukemia and had little time left, Constance had decided to use her final opportunity to accomplish the goal that had defined her life, fighting to abolish the death penalty. Zach questioned why Constance would go so far as to make David appear responsible if she intended to die anyway. Bitsy explained that framing David was essential to Constance's plan. By creating a convincing murder case and leaving behind evidence that pointed toward him, Constance could force the authorities to carry out an execution based on a crime that had never actually been committed by the person they had condemned. Bitsy now understood that the missing portion of the recording was probably still with Dusty, so she and Zach quickly located Dusty's home. They checked the time and saw that it was already 4:50 p.m. David's execution was less than 2 hours away. Once they found his address, they put together a simple plan to get inside without being noticed. Zach contacted Dusty and managed to draw him away from the house. While he was gone, Bitsy entered the property and began searching for the missing recording. Her suspicion proved correct. She eventually found the complete videotape and realized that it contained the evidence they desperately needed. Bitsy wasn't giving up at all. Bitsy watched the recording and saw that everything they had suspected was true. Constance had arranged the entire scene herself and had carried out the plan without being attacked by anyone. Dusty had apparently known about the plan and helped Constance create the evidence that would later point toward David. Seeing the full recording and understanding what Constance had sacrificed for her cause overwhelmed Bitsy, and she broke down in tears. Before David was taken to the execution chamber, prison staff brought him his final meal. It consisted of pancakes, a simple breakfast that carried a painful meaning for him because it was something he had once promised to prepare for his son.
Can we have pancakes for breakfast?
Okay. Whipped cream? That's a lot of requests for one little boy.
Why don't you go to sleep?
Do Cloud like to?
Then Bitsy and Zach quickly left the house with the evidence. As they departed, Dusty remained nearby and watched them from the shadows without trying to stop them. There were only 8 minutes left before David's execution, leaving almost no time to get the recording to the prison. Bitsy told Zach to immediately contact the authorities and everyone else who needed to know while she drove directly to the prison with the evidence. Their final attempt to reach David was suddenly threatened when the rental car broke down halfway there. With no time to wait for another vehicle, Bitsy abandoned the car and began running toward the prison. Every second mattered now. Inside the prison, preparations for the execution were already underway. Reporters and other spectators had gathered around the execution chamber, waiting for David to be put to death as the final minutes of his life disappeared.
When Cain killed Abel, God cast him out. He didn't kill him.
Bitsy was still racing toward the prison when the execution took place. Exhausted from running and desperate to reach David in time, she arrived too late. By then, the lethal injection had already been administered, and David was dead. The evidence she had fought so hard to recover could no longer save his life. Yet, although David had been executed, Bitsy refused to let the truth disappear with him. She immediately released the videotape to the public. The recording exposed what had really happened to Constance and revealed that David had been wrongly convicted. The news quickly spread across the country, appearing on major television networks, newspapers, and other media outlets. People learned that Constance had deliberately arranged her own death and that David had been executed for a murder he had never committed. The revelation caused widespread anger and shock, turning David's execution into a major national controversy. The scandal also gave new strength to the movement against the death penalty. Constance had wanted to prove that the system could execute an innocent person, and although her plan had cost David his life, the result was exactly the kind of public reaction she had hoped to create. A powerful nationwide campaign for the abolition of capital punishment began gaining momentum, with David's wrongful execution becoming one of its most important examples. At the same time, another part of the story remained hidden. Police went to Dusty's home after identifying him as a possible accomplice, but by the time they arrived, he had disappeared. He had taken the money that had been paid to David's lawyer and quietly left the country. His sudden disappearance raised even more questions about his true role.
Dustin Wright.
It appears Wright withheld a tape to make a political point about the potential for Dana. What everyone here is asking.
It's a terrible tragedy, and there will be a full investigation.
Dusty eventually arrived at an apartment in Spain carrying the money. He placed the entire $500,000 outside the apartment door. After he stepped away, the door opened. The woman inside the apartment was David's former wife. When she opened the door, she found David's coat and the box containing the $500,000. Inside, she also found the postcard written by the female student, in which she apologized and admitted that her earlier accusation against David had been false. Back at the newspaper office, Bitsy received an unexpected package. Inside was a toy, along with a letter explaining that the toy contained the key to freedom. The message immediately reminded her of David's earlier words about freedom and the hidden key. She examined the toy and discovered that it contained a box filled with videotapes. Bitsy quickly found a private room, locked the door, and began watching the recordings. The new footage revealed something Bitsy had never expected to see. A man entered the scene. Bitsy recognized him, but the truth was so difficult to accept that she initially struggled to believe what she was seeing. As the recording continued, the mystery surrounding David's fingerprints was finally explained. David was shown approaching Constance and deliberately touching her head, making sure his fingerprints would be left behind, because he wanted to complete the goal she had devoted her life to achieving. David had also used his final days to make sure Bitsy would eventually discover the complete truth. He knew she would blame herself for arriving too late to save him. I didn't see this coming.